Hello, everybody, and welcome to Parashas Pekudei on this week's Waypoint podcast episode, where we give you nuggets of Torah insight from the weekly portion. So, Pekudei is sometimes its own portion on a leap year, but on non-leap years, it is combined with the previous week's parasha. So, depending on when you're watching this, whether or not it's a leap year, will determine whether or not you're watching two videos this week or just one. So, little fun fact. However, as the recording of this episode, these two are back-to-back. It is not a leap year. So anyway, that being said, our overview of the portion this week. So we're going into the continuing of the construction of the tabernacle, but now we're sort of moving on to the construction of the garments for Aaron and his sons, all the priestly garments and everything else. I should note that Pekudei means the tallies of, to count, to tally. And so that's why some of your translations will say these are the accounts of the tabernacle of the testimony as they were recorded. These are the tallyings. These are the sort of the counting or the kind of ledger, if you will. And at the very end in chapter 40, this is the final chapter of Shemot, Exodus. Now they are setting up the tabernacle. They are putting everything together. They're lighting the menorah. They're making it set up. They're putting all the final touches together. And then at the very, very end here, the last few verses, the glory fills the tabernacle immediately, which is a great and wonderful thing. And that is the end of Shemot. And so we will begin next week with a whole new book. And anyway, that being said, I'm going to hand off the lesson to my colleague, Brad, who I am absolutely confident has prepared a wonderful lesson for you this week. And so without further ado, shalom.
Shalom, everyone. Allow me to personally welcome you to the Waypoint podcast for this week's Parsha. This week was, again, kind of more stuff that we seem to have read before. But one particular verse that stuck out to me, and it may seem like it's an insignificant one. Of course, in the Torah, there is no insignificant verse. But this in particular, it's one of those that kind of, it slips right by you because it seems like it's just explanation of detail. But Exodus 40:18, where it says that Moses set up the tabernacle, placing its sockets, setting up its planks, inserting its bars, and directing its posts. This kind of led me down a rabbit hole that ultimately left me with some amazement at some of the thematic ways that Moshe is most certainly a picture of Messiah in a number of ways. So first, to kind of shape why I went down this rabbit hole, Rabbeinu Bahya writes concerning this verse in his commentary. The Torah writes the following sequence: Moses erected the tabernacle. He put down its sockets and emplaced its boards and inserted its bars and erected its pillars. The wording indicates that Moses repeated this procedure many times over. The Torah carefully refrains from mentioning that he dismantled any part of the tabernacle in the process. Only actions which resulted in additional sanctity are spelled out. So this first and foremost brought to mind that it is in fact Moses at this point who is doing this, and not Aaron, right? It's not the high priest, and it's the reason that stands out is there's a thought that exists. Matter of fact, I think even Andy Stanley in his book Irresistible explains this, that Israel was never supposed to have a king. That was an idea of man, right? That it was Israel's idea that they should have a king like all of the other nations, and that this was a way that they sought to be like the other nations. And kind of the point that he's hinting at there is that Israel was only ever intended to have, the priesthood and Hashem, and that's it. And there are others even within the Torah movement who seem to fall into this idea that the priesthood was supposed to be the end all be all of hierarchy for the Israelites, and that an actual king had no place in God's economy, that this was the idea of flawed men. And I just don't see that, because in the Torah itself, this would actually put Moses in a very similar position as many other kings that would follow after, right? So Moses had already acted in the role of the deliverer, so to speak, right? And then for a time he did act in a more priestly role, but he had instituted Aaron as the high priest at this point, and now he is constructing the temple. So what we find with other kings that we see in the future of the Tanakh is that this is the role of a king, to oversee and to institute the construction of the temple. This is not something that fell under the responsibility of the high priest. It was specifically a duty allotted to the king. And then we read that throughout the prophets. Matter of fact, even the Haftarah of last week was one where it was the king who commissioned the Israelites to give to the project of constructing the temple. Matter of fact, what we read in that parsha is the king commissioned this giving to be done, and then left the responsibility up to the priests to see to it that it got done. And ultimately, it didn't get done. So he had to kind of remind the priests, like, "Hey, why is this not being done?" So this is not something that was supposed to fall under the purview of the high priest. This falls under a kingly role, and as we know, Messiah will bring a temple with him when he ushers in the Messianic age, when he is ruling as king. So similar roles that he would have shared with Moses at this point is acting as a deliverer for those of us who are followers of Yeshua, and currently serving in the role of a priest, as Moses did before instituting Aaron as the priest. And we await the period where he brings us a temple as a king. But that's not really where this ends. This also comes to a point where, and this harkens to Paul's words a bit, because Paul also refers to Messiah as the last Adam. And so that got me thinking also. Is there some similarity maybe between, we can obviously see some similarity between Yeshua and Adam, and especially the roles that they would serve in, because that Adam's role ultimately was to reflect Hashem to all of creation. He was to be the shadow of Hashem. He was made in Hashem's shadow. You could almost say that actually is one rendering of being made in the image of Hashem, as being made in the shadow of Hashem. And as we all know, the shadow does what the caster does. That's the idea, is that the shadow really only does the actions that are done by the one casting it. And so if mankind was intended to be the shadow of Hashem, then mankind should be doing the deeds of Hashem, as we see Yeshua himself say that he only does his Father's deeds. An interesting thought about this, and this is something that my father and I have discussed at length, is the idea that for those of you familiar with the story of Peter Pan, there's an instance where his shadow is severed from him and separated from him. The shadow causes havoc because it's not doing what its caster is doing. It's not acting according to the will and actions of Peter Pan. It's acting of its own accord, and so havoc is then caused by it. And that is a weird way of making an imagery of what happened in the case of the first Adam, and then the last Adam, Yeshua, we see make that correction, and that connection is remade with the caster. But when it comes to Moshe, right, how does he fit into this same comparison? And so Lekuti Maharan 72:3 says, therefore, no one can erect the tabernacle but the tzaddik, who is the aspect of dust. This is the aspect of Moshe, who was the most humble man of all. Thus it is written, Exodus 40:18, Moshe erected the tabernacle. No one else could put it up, for only the tzaddik, who is the aspect of dust, the attracting force, could erect the tabernacle, the aspect of the attracting force for drawing godliness, as explained above. So it's the humility of Moshe, right? The fact that he you could say he brought himself so low that he's clearly described here as being one who encompasses the aspect of dust, which is a direct correlation and connection to the person of Adam. And so this is just another way that Moshe is ultimately a picture of Messiah for us. And these are certainly some of the things that I think should be taken into consideration when Moshe says that there would be a prophet like him. A lot of us read the verse that there would be a prophet like Moshe, and we think, oh yeah, so the deliverer who brought the people out of the land of Egypt and to the promised land. But that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, and I think that if we look deeper into the Torah, there's a lot of detail about Moshe that we miss, and some of it is in these smaller verses that are just very, very passing phrases that speak volumes. The fact that Moshe was the one who erected the temple, this is a demonstration of a very kingly role that Moshe was put in, and again is prophetic of the coming Messiah who would bring a temple with him. That is all I have for this week. It may be short, but it's what stood out to me, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back. Thank you once again, Bradley, for that awesome lesson. Once again, every week I love doing these because we both find different things as we go through the Torah portion, and I really appreciate Brad's rather unique input. So thank you once again, Bradley. I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too, the viewer and the listener. For my closing thoughts, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the title of this week's Torah portion, Pekudei, right? To tally, as I already sort of let you know in the opening. So this Torah portion, if nothing else, and this is not just me speaking, this is many different commentaries that I've read for this week. It teaches us that every person and everything that a person has to offer has value. And that's why everything is tallied when it comes to the tabernacle and its construction. Everything is taken for account, every item. And it's worth noting that at the very end of the portion, the Shekhinah, the dwelling presence, does not occupy the tabernacle until everything is present. So this teaches us that as a community, speaking like from last week's Torah portion, as a community, we all have something to offer, and we all do our part to help provide for the temple, quote unquote, for our community, our gathering. And everything that you have to offer, every presence, every little thing, even though you may see yourself as I'm just one in a bunch, or I don't really do much, I don't have much to give or offer, I don't have very many talents, none of that matters. Every single nail needed to be in place for the tabernacle to be have the dwelling presence of God. Everything had to be there. Everything had to be accounted for, which means every little thing has value and it's important. And once everything is together and it comes together, the dwelling presence is, of course, there. The dwelling presence coming at the very end is what shows us that every little thing that we do, we have to offer, into the community, whether you're just there as a person to be the 10th man in a minion, which is incredibly important, or you are in part of a bigger community and you feel like all you really do is make some cookies every so often. Everything is important and everything is counted. Everything is tallied. Pekudei. It matters. And that reminds me, just for the closing of my closing thoughts, of Isaiah chapter 27, verse 12. Speaking of the end times, working off of what Brad said, we will all be gathered together. And it's Isaiah in 27, verse 12. He says that every person, when we're gathered together into the ushering of the Messianic age, will be gathered one by one, which means you are, in fact, an important individual that absolutely matters. You matter to God. And even in the end of days, when hundreds of millions and millions of millions are being gathered back into the Messianic era, it doesn't matter. You will be counted individually because you have to be there for the dwelling presence to dwell in the temple at the end of the Messianic era. So go into the week knowing that you're here for a purpose. You absolutely matter, and everything you have to offer, it absolutely counts. It is being counted. The accounting is being made, and it is necessary. And that's why God put you on this earth, no matter where you are and no matter what you can give. So I hope that's encouraging. If you've liked today's episode, please consider liking and subscribing, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much. Shalom. Special thanks to this month's Patreon support.